It's the 80s in Japan, and the Yakuza has become the most powerful and influential force controlling the streets of Japan. Blackmail, extortion, murder, money laundering, drug dealing, they were doing it all and no one could stop them. Scratch that. No one wanted to stop them. At their peak, the Yakuza had infiltrated every industry in Japan. If the government ever decided to go to war with them, it would be like shooting themselves in the foot. And unlike other mobs and mafias, the Yakuza don't have a problem with the Japanese government, as long as the government lets them do what they want. And on the other hand, the government lets the Yakuza be, as long as they don't do something totally insane. The Yakuza has become one of the best integrated mafias in the entire world. So integrated, in fact, they were even used as President Eisenhower's security detail in Japan. And over the years, this is how the Yakuza came to rule Japan. Let's say you're Kenichi Shinoda, born in Kyushu in 1942 at the height of World War II, and you had one of the worst childhoods possible. Since Japan was on the losing side of the war, every blow that Japan took while at war, you felt too. The war drained Japan's resources, and Japan couldn't even help its own people, and everyone was left to fend for themselves. You practically had nothing. You wore ragged clothes every day, and your family was completely neglected by the government that they trusted. Even getting food each and every day was a struggle. You were desperate to break free from poverty, as it was the only thing you had ever known. So one day you thought to yourself, since the government couldn't come to help the people of Japan, someone had to step up and do it themselves. So you decided that you'd be the one to do it. After you graduated from Oita Prefectural High School, you knew you needed some money, so you went down to your local dock and got a job at a major fisheries company. You worked hard each day like you were supposed to, but you noticed something interesting while you were working at the dock. Every day while working at the dock, you noticed a large group of men coming into the dock every day unloading massive amounts of cargo. You were interested, so you wanted to know more. And you found out they were bringing in things like food, gasoline, and medicine. And they had lots of it. But that didn't really make any sense. Things like that were being rationed by the government because of the war. So how did these group of guys get their hands on these goods? That's because these guys weren't just any regular guys. They were Yakuza members, and these goods were actually smuggled into the dock. And they would later be sold at triple their price because no one else was selling them, making these guys tons of money in the process. And you knew at that point that you had to get in and get a piece of that pie for yourself, which is how you take the first step in turning the Yakuza into a money-making machine. In order to understand how the Yakuza made it to where they are today, we'll need to go back to where it all began in the early days of Japanese history. In the late 16th and early 17th century, Japan was in the middle of a revolution. For almost 100 years, Japan was at a civil war with itself, and the country was littered with war and destruction when attempting to find a leader to run the country. During the war, samurai were the most valuable assets to have if you wanted to fight your way to the top. You could hire them to kill anyone you wanted. Society was a lot different, and simply put, being a mercenary or a samurai was actually a really good career choice. You could make a living through intense violence. Many others also lived comfortably this way. But one day, things all changed in what felt like an instant. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun of the Tokugawa shogunate, had managed to get the country of Japan to cease their fighting and unite as one nation. This was great news for most people living in Japan, but this wasn't great news for samurai living in the country. Their primary source of income was now non-existent, and they were forced to either learn how to become a part of a civil society or get left behind. And that's exactly what happened. Those who made the change continued on with their lives, but those forgotten warriors who couldn't quickly fell to the bottom of society. You see, Japan was a very collective society, meaning your family and your reputation was everything. If your career or family wasn't highly respected, it was just as good as being dead. And just like that, these once highly respected and highly sought-after warriors were now treated like trash by the rest of society. The same people that they fought to protect were now the same ones who'd stabbed them right in their hearts. It was the ultimate betrayal from the ones you cherished most. You didn't have a family, and now you didn't even have a place within Japanese society. You were a complete and total outcast. And now you'd spend your days at bars getting drunk and gambling with other outcasts just like you. And in fact, gambling is where the Yakuza got its name. In a card game using 3 Hanafuda cards, one of the worst hands to be dealt was 893, which translates to Yakuza in Japanese, and symbolizes that those who identified as Yakuza were dealt the worst hands in society. As Kenichi Shinoda, the story of the Yakuza resonated with you more than any other. Like them, you were dealt the worst hand in life, and like them, you wanted nothing more than to leave a mark on society. And using the Yakuza to take over Japan would be the perfect way to leave that mark. You'd get all of these guys that felt like lowlifes and outcasts together, and you'd give them something that they couldn't get anywhere else. Family and loyalty. Give them a new meaning to life and something they didn't want to lose. A real family. One that was willing to do both good and bad things to protect them. They'd have a home, food, and a place where they'd know they were accepted regardless of their social standing. You'd give them a valuable sense of belonging and a chance to be more than just a label. And quickly, men all around the prefectures of Japan began to follow your lead and become part of your new family, which led you to becoming the leader of the strongest organization in Japanese history, the Yamaguchi-gumi. These weren't just random people or your average Joes. Most members of your new organization were hardened criminals and people who had spent their lives taking every opportunity they could to make money, but always doing it alone. Now, under your guidance, they could work together and become one of the most powerful criminal enterprises the world has ever seen. Now that Japan was peaceful and its economy began to flourish, there was now a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make massive cash. Since you now had a large number of guys working for you, you could now go and start making some serious money. So you came up with a plan. You'd send out some of your smartest guys on a mission. And you also knew that the best people to target to make the most money would be the people who already had it, or were trying to make some themselves, business owners. As a business owner yourself, you know that it's always beneficial to have extra money to reinvest in your business. But you had an idea. Instead of asking someone to invest in your business, you'd be the one to invest in someone else's. So you went around your town promising to invest your money into all the local small businesses in your area. Because you knew that it was hard running a small business, and getting an investment would be life-changing for any small business owner. But when you told them you'd invest in their business, they were overjoyed and you were happy to invest in a small business. But there was only one small thing you forgot to mention. If they took this investment, they'd also be signing away their business to you. The secret here is that this investment isn't actually an investment, it's really just a loan, and they're responsible for paying all of it back. And hidden inside the terms and agreements of this loan were some really unfavorable demands, like maybe repaying the entire amount of the loan in 30 days. And if you couldn't do that, then you'd have to pay 50% or more in interest every single week. And once the business owners found out, they were absolutely enraged. They called you a liar, a scammer, a con artist, but so what? If they tried to do anything except for pay their interest payments on time to you every single week, you could just send a few of your guys down to their business and completely tear it apart. Destroy all their furniture, loot the entire building, or even burn it down. Whatever you needed to do was on the table. So that way they knew to never be late on their payments ever again. But now you had another problem. You were making so much money from this scheme that people quickly caught on to your plan and started causing problems for you. But then you just got another great idea. Since you had already caused them a problem with your threats, violence, and destruction against them and their business, why not offer them protection from it as well? You could send a different set of guys to come in and give them an offer they couldn't refuse. You'd tell them that if they paid you a fee each week, then in exchange, you'd be the one to go out and make sure that no Yakuza or anyone else would harm them or their business as long as they paid their money on time. And just like that, you now had an extortion racket pulling in even more cash from the same problem that you originally created. And now you could laugh your way all the way to the bank as they kept handing you millions in profits. But things wouldn't stay this way for long. Eventually, people would start taking matters into their own hands and retaliating. In fact, one woman would even try to sue you for threatening and extorting her. And this was a huge issue for you. She demanded that the group pay her, and now you and your entire syndicate were in the media spotlight and now people hated you. And you needed to change that. If the public liked you, then the government would also have a much harder time putting you behind bars. So you'd have to think of something new. You needed a way to beat the politics and a way to bend the law so that people would actually support and appreciate the Yakuza. And you thought of a genius way to do exactly that. Instead of having only illegal businesses, why not have legal businesses as well? You'd make it so that if the government ever tried to attack you, they'd also be attacking the citizens as well, because you'd provide jobs for them and get them to support you. You even went out and sent people hundreds of trucks full of food, water, blankets, and first aid after an earthquake struck Tohoku in 2011. That way, you could get people to think, look, they're not criminals, they have a real business, and they're actually helping our community with their money. When in reality, you were making billions of dollars from too many crimes to count. And since you had a bunch of hardworking members at your disposal, something like construction or real estate would be perfect. Because it's not about following the law. You and your guys didn't care about being a good citizen. All you really cared about was making it look like you were a law-abiding citizen. So you could now get your hands into real businesses and cleaner ways of making money on the surface, and your first target was real estate. Surprisingly, getting into real estate was actually really easy, because you had leverage to get a deal, because the government actually had a problem and needed your help. For example, in 1960, the government was flying President Eisenhower over to the country, and they needed to show him and the rest of the world that Japan was capable of keeping him safe. And what better image to display your strength to the world than some of your country's most hardened men? But then the government started to think, maybe you could be more useful to them than just being bodyguards. Maybe they could actually use your men to build for them. This is exactly what you wanted. Despite your criminal reputation, your biggest enemy was now one of your clients, and now they'd rely on you to get things done. And just like that, you'd now went from criminals to simply just businessmen. But you'd operate in a gray area where legality and illegality were now a blurred line. So now it was the 1980s, and after working with the government, you knew you had a golden opportunity for the future of the Yakuza. And this was when they made one of their first big moves into completely controlling Japan: real estate. You devised a clever scheme that leveraged the group's skills in intimidation and coercion to muscle your way into the property market. And here's how you did it. You started by sending your enforcers known as Jigeya to work for real estate agents. Imagine you're a real estate developer with a large real estate portfolio and more money than you know what to do with. And you see a property that you know will make you even more money, but you run into a problem. The person you want to buy this house from is super stubborn and refuses to sell their property to you. You've offered money, incentives, everything you can think of, but nothing was working. But then one day you're approached by some Yakuza men, and they call themselves Jigeya, and promised you that if you hired them, all of your seller problems would quickly disappear. So what would these guys do that you couldn't that would get this guy to sell the house? Well, these guys were well versed in intimidation, and their tactic was to terrorize him until he literally couldn't take it anymore. They filled his mailbox with unpleasant items, graffitied obscene messages on his walls, broke and destroyed his windows, and they even emptied an entire septic tank into his house through a window. He was in a shitty situation, and the Yakuza would do whatever it took to make his life unbearable. So bad to the point that it would make more sense for him to just sell the house and move out. It was a win-win. You would buy the house and the Yakuza would get their money. And the best part was that the government was letting it happen. According to the Yakuza member Ryuma Suzuki, without them, the cities wouldn't be able to develop. The big corporations don't want to put their hands into the dirt. They don't want to get involved in trouble. They wait for other companies to do the dirty business first. But you thought to yourself, if you could do this with real estate, why stop there? Why not do this with more businesses? So that's exactly what you did. You repeated this same process across many businesses across Japan for the next 40 years. You had ties in construction, real estate, entertainment, and even gave out actual loans. And before you knew it, you were involved in almost every major business in Japan. And now, the Yamaguchi Gumi was raking in $8 billion every year and making you rich beyond your wildest dreams.